It is here, you guys. It's here, the day that we talk about Iron Lung. Markiplier's debut movie, and I say debut because yesterday it was the top movie in America, and he will be doing this again, mark my worm, is phenomenal. Like, truly, actually, legitimately phenomenal. In almost every way that it can be. Short little spoiler-free review for those of you who haven't seen it yet, who don't want to be in spoiler city. The acting is crazy. The acting is crazy, and so much of it is voice acting, and that is so hard to pull off for as long as the movie does. This movie follows a convict who has made a plea deal for freedom, but in order to earn his freedom, he has to go down in what is called the Iron Lung, which is a little submarine that you are welded into, and take photos of the terrain outside of the Iron Lung, because the world's covered in an ocean of blood. This movie follows a convict who is exploring this blood ocean in the Iron Lung, so a lot of the communications are happening through voice acting. Incredible voice acting, incredible. I'm honestly, truly amazed. I literally got home from the movie theater and sat down to record this. That's how good this shit was. So yeah, the acting was incredible every single step of the way. Alongside that, the sound design. Oh my God, we went to see this movie in Arizona. We actually planned a whole trip around seeing this movie in Arizona, and then we went to the movie theater and my dogs were barking too much at the hotel and we had to go home, back to the hotel. And then we had to come home back to Utah. But we ended up not being too mad about that because the movie that we ended up seeing this film at had such better sound and speakers than the first one. The sound design is incredible, and I was so excited for the sound design because the game that this is based on is largely sound-based. Obviously, you can't see outside of the Iron Lung, so a lot of it is audio cues of what's going on outside the submarine and the blood ocean. All of that was incredible. And also, sorry, I'm saying incredible so much. Literally, I'm blown away. And it's not often that I say that, but you can tell that Markiplier has spent years, over a decade, playing horror games. You can tell that he has done his time editing this film. You can tell that it was a labor of love. It just was so good. Like the sound design and all of the audio things, but also the music was so good. Like so many of these different choices made along the way just played into it being amazing. Set design, costume design were so cool. We're mostly dealing with, well, if I can say it, it might be a tiny bit of a spoiler, but we're in the submarine the whole movie, essentially. And that is so cool. The way that the submarine has these different parts to it. It's never boring, even though we're in the same set the whole time. Markiplier's costume design was really cool. And his costume changed throughout the movie, which you would think that, you know, it's just a movie about a guy in a submarine, right? He's not necessarily gonna have an outfit change down there, but they used the costuming in the same way that I feel Pig used costuming really well, which is that both characters are essentially wearing the same outfit the whole time, the same costume, but it changes in small ways throughout the film to show their character change throughout. And so that was really sick as well. So, spoiler-free review, 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10. A lot of people are always like, oh, I wish I could experience that for the first time again. I feel like I'm really excited to experience for the second time for the first time because there's so much to unpack and there's so much to learn and dive into and know about this movie. And like I said, I literally just got home from the theater, so I have not done any outside research. I was thinking about it, but I decided that I just wanted to give a little review based on my exact impressions from the movie, because as a regular old moviegoer, you know, not every moviegoer is gonna go home and research the film intently. And so I feel like right now I have the clearest vision of what it would be like to be just the average consumer that's not gonna go religiously research this for the next 2 weeks of her life. So yes, end of the spoiler-free review. It was phenomenal. 10 out of 10, 11, 12, 13 out of 10. Now into Spoiler City. So I think what makes this movie so good is that it focuses in on a few central themes. First of all, we are exploring the psychological horror versus the monster horror. We're exploring kind of a religious trauma indoctrination type thing, and we are seeing the impacts of guilt. So the third theme is really guilt versus forgiveness. It approaches all of that in such an interesting way. I'm like having trouble deciding what one I want to talk about first because they are all so good, not me beating up my background. I guess I'll start here. This movie doesn't give you very much information, which I think is a good choice. I was wondering throughout how I felt about that, and I think in the end I got enough information and I had enough sense of what was going on that I was like, you know what, I don't really need more than that. I do really appreciate when a horror movie can keep things ambiguous and not shove everything down a viewer's throat, and I think that that is important to do. It really increases the tension and the suspense and keeps you in the story more because you're constantly guessing, you're not being told everything, you're always involved, you're looking for clues, you're trying to piece this all together. And so I really liked in the end that I didn't get as much information as I could have gotten or even as I wanted. There were lots of things that were unexplained, a lot of things that were left up to the viewer. And that's part of why I'm going to be researching this film a whole bunch, because there's just a lot that is left up to interpretation and not explicitly explained. One of those things being kind of the religious or organizational structure and trauma. And the only reason I'm kind of comparing it to religion in my head is because it does feel very culty. The main character, they refer to him as convict, but it ends up being a pretty big deal that his name is Simon. What was awesome is that I never saw Markiplier during this movie. I just saw Simon. He is a great actor. He really got to show off his acting chops here, which was so fun to see. Everyone got to really show off their acting chops here. Simon belonged to this thing called Eden. I can't remember what the other organization is called. My bad. The organization that basically has him imprisoned and has sent him down in the Iron Lung. But they're like these two warring sides, and Simon's side is the lesser side as opposed to this bigger organization or structure. And I barely have enough information to describe this to you. The movie does it really well though, of just like slipping in enough world building here and there that you kind of get it. The way that these organizations are kind of pinned against each other, and the way that the monster in the end ends up speaking to Simon, different things that Simon sees throughout, just feel very religiously toned in nature to me. And I don't know if that's because I grew up in a religious cult or what, but that was just really cool to see. Kind of, it was a very low level through line of everything. It definitely was not like the sole or biggest focus of anything, but it mattered, and it added a cool extra dimension to everything that was happening in the A plot, which is what a subplot should do. Okay, I ditched my ponytail. I missed the rest of my hair. So the next thing that we kind of explored in this movie was I'm gonna go into guilt next. I think that's what I want to talk about next. This concept of guilt and being guilty. Simon is in the Iron Lung because he's a prisoner, because he blew up a space station. I think it was a space station. Some kind of station. He exploded it. And he didn't want to. He was caught in the crosshairs of a plan that other people made that went awry, but he is the only one serving penance and doing time for what was done there. And the idea of this guilt is just interwoven so beautifully throughout the story. This movie is a character drama. It's a horror film, but I'm literally getting chills. It does so well with the horror because it is so deeply ingrained into and based on Simon and his experience, which is why we only get shots outside of the submarine twice in the entire film, because we are meant to be there. Even at the beginning, when Simon is around other people and discussing things with other people, he's still inside the Iron Lung. The Iron Lung becomes this vessel of guilt, and he is in there the whole time. He cannot absolve himself. There's a recurring theme of him being like, and then I'll be free. I'm gonna do XYZ, and then you guys said you'd bring me up and I'd be free. And every time they're like, yeah, and every time they're like, sorry, we just couldn't do that. We can't bring you up. You're still not free. You're still not absolved. He is just dealing with this guilt over what he's done the entire time, and it's eating away at him. Literally, there's this super sick practical effect moment at the end. It just was a cherry on top because we got so much psychological horror and so much monster horror, and we got a couple different genres of horror, and then the cherry on top at the end was like, oh, and Markiplier's taking off his wrappings around his arms and his skin is peeling off. He has these blisters and these boils. We got some practical effects with holes in his hand, and I will get there with the vines growing over his body, but it was so cool the way that they showed his guilt really permeating everything through the physical effects that he went through during the film. He has these wraps on his arms the entire time, but there's blood on them at some point, so they kind of start to go downhill a little bit, and by the time he's taking them off at the end, his skin is peeling off underneath, like in big chunks and layers, and it's just really symbolic, you know, to think, oh, he's had those wraps around his arms the whole time, right where chains would be, and he reveals what's underneath at the end, and it's just eating away at his flesh. The way that this situation gets more dire, which I loved that they followed, and I'm not surprised that they followed the game so closely, I mean, the oxygen was running out. Sorry, I yawned. The blood is seeping in, and in the end, we're eaten by this giant fish, just like the game. I think it was a giant fish. Giant fish alien? I don't know. This movie made so much clear and so much unclear, and so much of what they made clear made things unclear. They followed to the T with like the blood pouring into the submarine, and as the situation's getting more dire, as he's running out of air, as he's trying to find some way to get back to the surface, still trying to bargain for his life, even as blood starts pouring into the submarine, he is fighting with everything that he has. I feel like in a lot of films there would be a moment where the character gives up a little sooner, or a moment where it's over a little sooner than it was. It really, for Simon, was not over until the moment that it had to be over. He wasn't gone until he literally could not fight anymore. He just was so committed to absolving himself. And I love that they took this direction for a game that's based around playing a convict trying to get their life back, their freedom back. I love that that's the direction they really, really took, and they really dove into playing with this guilt as a sort of enemy in and of itself, kind of making everything in the world a vessel or a symbol or some kind of consequence to play into that sense of guilt. He talks about how he wants to get his life back, he wants to live, but it really throughout the movie is like, you just want to be seen as good and innocent again. He really just wants his innocence back. The whole film is just kind of based around this impending sense of doom and dread. I really like that they didn't make it a positive, happy ending. There's just this sense of like everything is a little bit hopeless and it's a little bit doomsday, and there's no way this convict is gonna get his freedom. There's no way they're gonna pull him up to the surface. And there's a moment where they are like, I mean, an incredible moment that leads into them being like, we haven't had contact from you in days. Like, how are you still alive? You should be out of oxygen. And he's like, I don't know. It still says I have 25% oxygen left. And it's like, he can't die. He cannot fully give up the ghost and rest. Like, he is tormented even by little shadows and things in the ship, which gets into the little psychological layer that I so loved and adored. I love a good psychological horror film. I love a good psychological horror moment. I especially love things like this, which are akin to The Thing, where it's a little bit of both. Psychological horror because we're in this scary, spooky situation and there's a lot of mistrust and suspicion happening, but also monster horror because there is something out there. They started very, very early with Simon seeing a shadow of something in the ship, and that moment, literally, that was my face. I was like, oh my god, there was something in there! There are a few different moments where Simon is seeing things inside the ship and we're like, whoa. They talk about early on in the film, they establish that this camera that Simon, I almost said Markiplier, that Simon is using to take photos is not actually a camera, it's a radiation gun. Which, by the way, on the topic of the guilt thing, and this being a very character drama, character-driven, character-focused film, which is why it is so good. When Simon uses the radiation gun, he's in the hangar thing for the submarine. There are 3 people around. He goes to take a photo, and the tech is working on the submarine, and the tech gets blasted with this radiation gun. And at like 3 separate parts in the film, Simon is apologizing about that. As soon as the woman is like, that's a radiation gun, why would you do that? He's like, oh shit, like I did not know. And as we learn a little bit more about his past, it's really, I think, masterful the way that they brought the echoes of his guilt and his sense of like, I mean, with the station, he's like, I didn't mean for that to happen. That wasn't my intention. Exactly what he says with the radiation gun. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't know it was a radiation gun. I didn't mean to hurt him. I'm really sorry. And he's just apologizes a few times throughout the movie. And it really just was a little tiny hint of guilt at first that by the 3rd time that it happened, I was like, oh, this is a way to show what the character is really dealing with. That was a little moment into the internal conflict that recontextualized a lot of the external conflict into the guilt versus innocence battle that I was talking about earlier. So going back to whatever the fuck I was talking about before, the psychological versus monster horror, there is a moment where he's flipping through this manual and it says use at your own risk about the radiation camera. And so as he's seeing these things and he's having these kind of strange experiences. It's very fever dream-ish, and we already can kind of tell that he's not necessarily the most reliable narrator. He's welded shut into a submarine inside a hot blood ocean. Like, of course his psyche is going to be a little bit under stress. Of course he's not going to be the most reliable narrator, but he finds this use at your own risk warning right after he's using the camera as a light, and he's just taking photo after photo after photo after photo. So the first thing that came to mind psychological horror wise was, oh, is he giving himself radiation poisoning? But he falls a couple times, he gets concussions, he's bleeding from his head, and then at one point he references CO2 poisoning. And this is kind of the stuff that I kind of wanted to research, because I don't super know how CO2 poisoning and radiation poisoning exist. I don't know how they work. I do know that they exist. I'm tired. I don't know the ins and outs of how they work, but he starts getting these really metal hallucinations. In these hallucinations, he is seeing things that were outside of the highlight. There's more than 2 shots outside of the iron lung. There's 2 shots, and then there's like a scene that's outside of it. But in these hallucinations, he is seeing up close and personal in the flesh these things that he's seeing on the x-rays of the outside world. So you really can't tell. You're like, okay, is this a monster moment where he's seeing the monster doing something, or is it a psychological horror moment where he's having hallucinations of these things? And it really, really, really deeply plays into that. One of my favorite moments of the entire movie is definitely when he is taken to the blood, like he rises from this blood ocean and he realizes he's in the middle of the ocean and he is shackled down to something deep in the ocean. So his head's above water, his top half's above water, but he can't lift his arms, and he looks up and this monster that he has seen outside on the cameras is descending back into the depths of the ocean. Which I also really like that they played on the fact that the ocean is terrifying, which I know is so much of this is thanks to David Szymanski. And I'm sure that that's something that he wanted to play with in the original Iron Lung game, but I love that they just explored more of like, there is something out there and this is deep sea exploration and there's so much of the ocean that we don't know. The ocean is truly terrifying. There could be creatures like that down there. Like, we literally have no clue. And that was just a fun idea to explore. But that moment where he's shackled in the middle of this ocean is crazy. And it's so, so well done. And then we go back to the submarine. All of a sudden we're back in the submarine and he's throwing up blood. And so it is completely unclear whether that was a external or internal thing. I mean, it's a little bit clear. Then we get later into the movie and he's hearing these voices, especially as this monster is closing in on him, especially as the thing outside is getting closer. The voices are getting louder. The internal torment is getting louder. It is like the psychological effects are intertwined with the monster. The closer the monster is, the more you feel it, because there's also a moment where he has to go back down to where the monster is to get something because he's making his final bid for freedom. He has to go back down. He's doing pretty okay, but then as he descends back down into this area, he starts to get really loopy again. And so I think that it is connected to the monster. The monster makes you see and hear these things and experience these things. Just all very, very cool. And finally, the tension. The way that they continued to ramp up the tension. You know, at first we're jazzed about, okay, we're on this mission, we have this goal, he's steering the ship, and we have our oxygen and stuff, and then slowly our oxygen is depleting, and we are in the red on the depth that the submarine can take, and there are things that Simon is seeing in the corner. There's a note left by the last person that they sent down, even though Simon was told he's the first person. There's all these different things that are slowly ramping up the tension, and then the way that it just comes all crashing down, like everything that we have been building up to, suddenly we are experiencing it all. It's all crashing down on us when the blood starts flooding into the submarine. And that is something that if you've seen the game, if you've watched Markiplier's playthrough, you're expecting the blood to start overflowing through everything, because that's what happens in the game. It does happen differently in the movie than in the game, which I think is awesome. But they went a step further and they said, oh, not only is it terrifying to be swallowed by a sea of blood, but we're also going to make it hot. It's getting hot in the submarine, so we can only assume that the blood is boiling, or at least extremely warm, because there's condensation inside the iron lung. But we're also going to make the blood poisonous, acidic, like damaging. But it's also interesting because at the beginning, it's not that way. A drop lands on Simon's hand and he is fine, and he just looks at it and he's like, whoa. But by the end, a drop lands on his head and it sears deep into his skin, and it's causing these injuries and these boils, and it's causing he's disfigured at the end. He ends up having to dive into and swim through this blood for a box that I still don't really understand the significance of, but he was told it was significant, and therefore I was so bought in by that point that I was like, okay, it's significant. We're getting the box, you know? And it was the last shot of the film, so I should maybe research why it mattered so much. But either way, I was so bought in by the rest of the movie that I was like, okay, yeah, I'm here for it. Word. Basically has swam through blood and has been completely drenched by this point by his sins, and he is disfigured. His face is changing. There are vines growing on him, all of these things. And so I like that they took it up a notch and they made it even more horrific than it already was. So that is my review of Iron Lung. I really truly did not feel like any time passed watching this movie, but I also felt like I was there for years inside that submarine. I'm really excited to watch this. I think it's like an Interstellar where I'm gonna have to watch it 2 or 3 times to really catch everything. I really love that Markiplier threw the bird to Hollywood with this shit. This is an indie movie unlike any other indie movie that has ever been made. This is like historical. All the days of him banging his head against the wall and live streaming and being like, Iron Lung's driving me crazy, makes sense. And I'm really glad that he got through it, because this movie is incredible. It's worth it to see it on a day that's not Tuesday and pay a full price. I don't know if y'all, wherever you are, do you have cheaper movies on Tuesdays? Comment below and let me know. Why not? I would pay extra money to go see it again. And I will be seeing it more times in the theaters because that was just such a romp and such an experience, and it drags you down psychologically with it. Like, you feel like you're going crazy as you're watching Simon go crazy. It just was like so intense. It honestly was a movie going experience unlike any other that I've ever really had. So with that, thank you so much for watching. Go see Iron Lung, and I will catch you on the Foodie Flip.